The routine stop. Officer James Hawkins drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his patrol car, his eyes scanning the quiet suburban streets of Millbrook. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. It was a picturesque scene, but Hawkins felt a familiar restlessness stirring within him. 15 years on the force had left him jaded. The idealistic rookie who'd once dreamed of making a difference had long since faded, replaced by a man who saw his badge as little more than a means to an end. Hawkins had learned to play the game, to navigate the thin blue line between duty and opportunity. He'd become an expert at bending the rules just enough to get what he wanted without raising too many eyebrows. As he turned onto Maple Street, a flash of movement caught his eye. A sleek black Mercedes sped past, clearly exceeding the posted limit. Hawkins allowed himself a small smile. This could be interesting. He flipped on his lights and sirens, feeling a surge of adrenaline as the Mercedes reluctantly pulled over to the curb. Hawkins took his time approaching the vehicle, savoring the moment. He tapped on the driver's side window with his knuckles, watching as it smoothly glided down to reveal a young man in an expensive suit. "License and registration, please," Hawkins drawled, his tone deceptively casual. The driver, who couldn't have been more than 25, fumbled in his wallet before producing the requested documents. Hawkins noted the trembling in the young man's hands, the sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Nervous. Good. Do you know why I pulled you over today, mister?" Hawkins glanced at the license. "Chen." I'm not sure, officer," the young man stuttered. "Was I speeding?" Hawkins leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "You were doing 45 in a 30 zone, Mr. Chen. That's a pretty serious violation. Step out of the vehicle, please." As Chen complied, Hawkins conducted a quick visual sweep of the car's interior. His gaze lingered on a small duffel bag on the passenger seat. "Interesting. Mind if I take a look in your vehicle, Mr. Chen?" Hawkins asked, his tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. Don't you need a warrant for that?" Chen's voice quavered. Hawkins' smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not if you give me permission. You don't have anything to hide, do you?" Chen hesitated, his eyes darting between Hawkins and his car. I'd rather you didn't, officer." "All right then," Hawkins said, his voice hardening. "I'm going to need you to place your hands on the hood of your vehicle. Spread your legs." As Hawkins patted Chen down, he could feel the young man trembling. He savored the power he held in this moment, the fear he instilled. It was a heady sensation. "What's in the bag, Mr. Chen?" Hawkins asked casually as he completed the pat-down. Just some gym clothes," Chen replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Hawkins chuckled. "Gym clothes in a Mercedes? Come on, son, you can do better than that." He paused, letting the tension build. "Here's what I think. I think you've got something in that bag you don't want me to see. Something that could get you into a lot of trouble." Chen's face paled. "Please, officer. I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," Hawkins said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But here's the thing. I'm not really interested in explanations. I'm interested in solutions. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Chen?" Chen nodded slowly, resignation settling over his features. How much?" Hawkins pretended to consider for a moment. "Well, speeding tickets can be pretty expensive these days. And if I were to find something incriminating in that bag of yours, well, that could lead to all sorts of complications. I'd say 5,000 ought to cover it." Chen's eyes widened. 5,000? I don't have that kind of cash on me." "I'm sure a smart young man like yourself can figure something out," Hawkins said, his tone menacing. "Unless you prefer a call for backup, and we do this by the book." After a moment's hesitation, Chen reached for his wallet. I have about 800 in cash. And my watch, it's worth at least 3,000. Hawkins considered the offer. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. He nodded curtly. "All right, Mr. Chen, let's make this quick." As Chen handed over the cash and his watch, Hawkins felt the familiar rush of satisfaction. It was almost too easy sometimes. These rich kids, more afraid of disappointing Daddy than facing the law, they were like lambs to the slaughter. "Now, Mr. Chen," Hawkins said as he pocketed his ill-gotten gains, "I trust we understand each other. This little incident never happened. You were pulled over for speeding, given a warning, and sent on your way. Is that clear?" Chen nodded frantically. "Yes, officer. Crystal clear." "Good," Hawkins said, stepping back. "You're free to go. Drive safely now." As Chen scrambled back into his Mercedes and sped away, Hawkins allowed himself a smug smile. Another successful day on the job. He'd long since stopped feeling guilty about these little arrangements. In his mind, he was simply taking advantage of opportunities that presented themselves. If these entitled brats were willing to pay to keep their noses clean, who was he to argue? Hawkins climbed back into his patrol car, tucking the watch into the glove compartment. He'd fence it later through one of his usual contacts. As for the cash, well, that would come in handy for his poker game tonight. As he pulled away from the curb, Hawkins failed to notice the flicker of movement in his rearview mirror. On the porch of a nearby house, partially obscured by a large potted plant, sat Sarah Chen, a rookie cop fresh out of the academy, and as it happened, Daniel Chen's older sister. Sarah had been enjoying her day off, reading a book on her front porch when she'd witnessed the entire encounter. At first, she'd been concerned about her brother's driving habits, but as she watched Officer Hawkins' interaction with Daniel, a cold knot of dread had formed in her stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't what being a police officer was supposed to be about. Sarah had joined the force to make a difference, to protect and serve. What she'd just witnessed flew in the face of everything she believed in. As Hawkins' patrol car disappeared around the corner, Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing. What should she do? Report what she'd seen. But it would be her word against the veteran officers. And Daniel, would he back her up or stay silent out of fear? Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't let this go. Somehow, someway, she had to expose the truth, but she'd have to be smart about it. Careful. If Hawkins was willing to shake down civilians, there was no telling what else he might be capable of. For now, Sarah decided she would watch and wait, gather evidence, build a case. It wouldn't be easy, but she owed it to her brother, to herself, and to every citizen who trusted the police to do the right thing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Maple Street, Sarah Chen made a silent vow. She would bring Officer James Hawkins to justice, no matter the cost. Little did Sarah know, her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the Millbrook Police Department to its core, exposing long-buried secrets and forcing every officer to confront the true meaning of the oath they'd sworn to uphold. Back at the station, Hawkins sauntered into the locker room, nodding casually to his fellow officers. He'd perfected the art of blending in, of being just another cop doing his job. No one suspected the depths of his corruption, the extent to which he'd twisted his authority to serve his own interests. As he changed out of his uniform, Hawkins reflected on his career. He'd started out idealistic, like all of them did, but years of dealing with the worst of humanity had worn him down. He'd seen how the system really worked, how the rich and powerful always seemed to get away with murder, sometimes literally. So he decided to get his piece of the pie. Why shouldn't he profit from the misery and stupidity he dealt with every day? It had started small. A few dollars here and there, skimmed from drug busts that never quite made it into evidence. Then it had escalated. Warnings instead of tickets in exchange for donations to the policeman's benevolent fund, aka Hawkins' pocket. Turning a blind eye to certain activities in exchange for a cut of the profits. And now he had it down to an art form. Hawkins closed his locker, checking his reflection in the small mirror inside the door. He straightened his tie, smoothed back his salt and pepper hair. To all outward appearances, he was the picture of a dedicated public servant. 15 years on the force, a respectable solve rate, a shelf full of commendations. Who would ever suspect? As he left the station, Hawkins nodded to the desk sergeant. "Have a good night, Bill. Don't work too hard." "You too, Jim," Bill replied with a chuckle. "Big plans tonight?" Hawkins shrugged, a practiced gesture of nonchalance. The usual. Might catch the game at O'Malley's." It wasn't entirely a lie. He would go to O'Malley's, but not for the game. The back room of the bar hosted a high-stakes poker game every Thursday night. It was where Hawkins laundered most of his ill-gotten gains, turning dirty money into gambling winnings that he could deposit without raising eyebrows. As Hawkins drove to O'Malley's, he allowed himself to relax. Another successful day. Another mark shaken down, and no one the wiser. Life was good. But even as Hawkins reveled in his perceived invincibility, the seeds of his downfall were already taking root. Sarah Chen sat in her apartment, poring over the police code of conduct, searching for the right way to report what she'd witnessed. And across town, in a cluttered home office, a local journalist named Michael Torres was about to receive an anonymous email that would set him on a collision course with the Millbrook Police Department's darkest secrets. The stage was set. The players were in motion. And Officer James Hawkins, confident in his ability to manipulate the system, had no idea that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down around him. As the night deepened and the streets of Millbrook grew quiet, the machinery of justice, slow but inexorable, began to turn. The truth, so long buried beneath layers of corruption and complicity, was clawing its way to the surface, and when it finally emerged, no one in Millbrook would ever be the same again. The routine traffic stop on Maple Street was just the beginning. A pebble tossed into a still pond, creating ripples that would soon become waves, crashing against the foundations of power and trust that held the community together. The reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, it would sweep away everything in its path, leaving behind a changed landscape where the lines between right and wrong, justice and vengeance, would be redrawn. For now, though, the night was still young, and in the back room of O'Malley's, Officer James Hawkins settled into his chair at the poker table, unaware that with each passing moment, the noose around his neck was tightening. The game was about to change, and Hawkins was playing with marked cards. Soon, he would learn the true cost of his actions, and the price of betraying the trust placed in him by the people he had sworn to protect and serve. The chips were down, the bets were placed, and in the grand casino of fate, the wheel of fortune was spinning, its outcome unknown but inevitable. For James Hawkins, Sarah Chen, and everyone caught in the web of corruption and deceit, the real gamble was just beginning. Suspicions arise. Sarah Chen stared at her computer screen, the glow illuminating her face in the dimly lit apartment. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded her. The image of Officer Hawkins shaking down her brother Daniel played on repeat in her mind, a constant reminder of the injustice she had witnessed. For the past week, Sarah had been meticulously combing through police reports, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that might corroborate her suspicions about Hawkins. So far, she had found nothing concrete, just a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. She rubbed her tired eyes, considering her next move. As a rookie, she was walking a dangerous line. Accusing a veteran officer of corruption without solid evidence could end her career before it truly began. But the alternative, staying silent, was unthinkable. A soft ping from her phone drew Sarah's attention. It was a text from Daniel. "Hey sis, can we talk? It's important." Sarah's heart raced. She had been meaning to speak with Daniel about the incident, but hadn't found the right moment. She quickly typed a reply. "Of course. Meet me at Rosie's Diner in 20 minutes. Daniel's response came almost immediately. "See you there." As Sarah grabbed her jacket and keys, she couldn't shake the feeling that this late-night meeting would be a turning point. Little did she know just how right she was. Across town, in a dimly lit bar, Officer James Hawkins was celebrating another successful poker night. The stack of chips in front of him represented more than just gambling winnings. It was the fruit of his corrupt labors, laundered and ready to be legitimized. "Another round, Jim?" O'Malley, the bar owner, called out. Hawkins grinned, riding the high of his win. "Why not? It's not every night a man gets this lucky." As O'Malley poured him another whiskey, Hawkins failed to notice the sharp gaze of Michael Torres, the local journalist, watching him from a corner booth. Torres had been a fixture at O'Malley's for years, known for nursing a single beer while eavesdropping on the conversations around him. Tonight, his attention was focused solely on Hawkins. The anonymous tip Torres had received a week ago was still fresh in his mind. It had been vague, hints of corruption within the Millbrook PD, with Hawkins' name prominently featured. At first, Torres had been skeptical. Accusations of police corruption were nothing new, and most turned out to be baseless. But as he watched Hawkins tonight, something didn't sit right. The cop's bravado, the ease with which he threw around money, the deference shown to him by some of the less savory characters in the bar, it all painted a picture that Torres couldn't ignore. His journalistic instincts were on high alert. There was a story here, buried beneath the surface, and Michael Torres was determined to uncover it. At Rosie's diner, Sarah sat across from her brother, taking in his nervous demeanor. Daniel's eyes darted around the nearly empty restaurant, his fingers fidgeting with a paper napkin. "Daniel," Sarah began gently, "what's going on? Is this about what happened last week?" Daniel's eyes snapped to meet hers, a mix of fear and relief in his gaze. You know about that." Sarah nodded slowly. "I saw it happen. I was on my porch when Officer Hawkins pulled you over." Daniel's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted. "I've been wanting to tell you, but I was scared. That cop Hawkins, he's dangerous, Sarah." "Tell me everything," Sarah urged, reaching across the table to squeeze her brother's hand reassuringly. Over the next hour, Daniel poured out the whole story, not just of the traffic stop, but of a wider web of corruption he had stumbled upon. He worked as a junior accountant at a local construction firm and had recently noticed discrepancies in the books. Kickbacks, inflated invoices, mysterious payments to shell companies, and at the center of it all, a name that kept recurring, J. Hawkins. "I think he's involved in something big, Sarah," Daniel concluded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that goes way beyond shaking down drivers for bribes." Sarah's mind raced, connecting the dots. This was bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just one corrupt cop. It was a systemic issue that reached into the local business community. "Daniel, we need to report this," Sarah said firmly. Her brother's eyes widened in panic. "No, you don't understand. These people, they're dangerous. If they find out I talked." "Then we'll be smart about it," Sarah assured him. "I won't mention your name, but this can't go on. It's my duty as a police officer to investigate this." As the Chen siblings formulated their plan, neither noticed the figure watching them from a car across the street. Officer Hawkins sat in his unmarked vehicle, a pair of binoculars trained on the diner's window. He couldn't hear their conversation, but the serious expressions and hushed tones told him all he needed to know. Hawkins had recognized Daniel Chen immediately, the kid from the traffic stop. Seeing him meeting with a rookie cop in the middle of the night set off alarm bells. He had assumed the matter was settled, but clearly he had underestimated the situation. "Damn it," Hawkins muttered, starting his car. He needed to get ahead of this, to contain the damage before it spiraled out of control. As he drove away, his mind was already formulating plans, considering angles, identifying pressure points. He hadn't come this far, built this comfortable life for himself, to let it all come crashing down because of one meddling rookie and her snitch of a brother. The next morning, the Millbrook Police Department buzzed with its usual activity. Officers came and went, phones rang, and the steady hum of bureaucracy filled the air. Sarah Chen walked in, her posture rigid, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had decided to start small, to test the waters before diving in too deep. Her first stop was the evidence room, where she hoped to review some of Hawkins' recent case files. It was a long shot, but if he was as corrupt as Daniel suggested, there might be discrepancies in his paperwork. "Morning, Chen," the evidence clerk greeted her. "What brings you down here?" Sarah plastered on her best casual smile. "Just doing some research for a case. Mind if I take a look at some of Hawkins' recent files?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Hawkins? That's unusual. You working with him on something?" "Just trying to learn from the best," Sarah lied smoothly. "You know how it is as a rookie. Gotta study the pros." The clerk shrugged, apparently satisfied. "All right, knock yourself out. Files are over there, organized by date." As Sarah began sifting through the paperwork, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Officer Hawkins himself. Well, Hawkins drawled, his tone friendly but his eyes cold. "What have we here? Rookies burning the midnight oil, eh?" Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Just doing some research, sir. Trying to improve my own reporting skills." Hawkins leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Word of advice, rookie. Be careful where you stick your nose. Not everyone appreciates a curious cop, especially one who can't mind her own business." Before Sarah could respond, Hawkins straightened up, his public persona sliding back into place. "Keep up the good work, Chen," he said loudly, clapping her on the shoulder. "Sky's the limit for a dedicated officer like yourself." As Hawkins walked away, Sarah let out a shaky breath. The threat had been clear, if veiled. Hawkins knew something was up, and he wasn't going to make her investigation easy. Across town, Michael Torres was following up on a lead of his own. The bartender at O'Malley's, a young woman named Jess, had agreed to meet him for coffee. She had seemed nervous on the phone, constantly checking to make sure no one was listening in. As Torres settled into a booth at a small cafe, he spotted Jess entering, her eyes darting around nervously. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Thanks for meeting me," Torres said gently. "I appreciate you taking a risk." Jess nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't be here. If they find out I talked to you—" "They won't," Torres assured her. "You have my word. Now, what can you tell me about Officer Hawkins and the poker games at O'Malley's?" Over the next hour, Jess painted a picture that confirmed Torres' worst suspicions. The poker games were more than just friendly gatherings. They were a hub for illegal activities, money laundering, insider trading, even orchestrating accidents for those who crossed the wrong people. "And Hawkins," Torres pressed. Jess's eyes filled with fear. "He's at the center of it all. The cops, the businessmen, the criminals, they all answer to him. He's got dirt on everyone, and he's not afraid to use it." As Torres scribbled notes, his mind reeling from the implications, he failed to notice the black SUV that had pulled up outside the cafe. Inside, Officer Hawkins watched the meeting with growing anger. "Damn reporter," he muttered, reaching for his phone. "Time to remind some people where their loyalties should lie." As Hawkins made a series of calls, setting in motion events that would have far-reaching consequences, the various players in this unfolding drama continued their moves and countermoves. Sarah Chen, poring over files in the evidence room. Michael Torres, carefully documenting Jess's explosive revelations. And in the shadows, the network of corruption that had long held Millbrook in its grip began to stir, sensing the threat to its existence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the town. Secrets long buried were clawing their way to the surface, and the line between right and wrong, between law and crime, was becoming increasingly blurred. As the sun set on Millbrook, casting long shadows across its streets, the various players in this unfolding drama returned to their homes, each carrying the weight of their discoveries and decisions. Sarah Chen, her mind racing with the implications of Hawkins' veiled threat. Michael Torres, carefully locking away his notes from the meeting with Jess. And James Hawkins himself, sitting in his darkened living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, plotting his next move. The pieces were in motion. The game had begun in earnest, And as night fell over Millbrook, the town held its breath, unaware of the storm that was brewing, a tempest of corruption, courage, and consequence that would leave no one untouched. The whistleblower. Michael Torres sat at his desk in the Millbrook Gazette's cramped office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his furrowed brow. It was well past midnight, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. The information he gathered over the past few weeks was explosive, to say the least. His meeting with Jess, the bartender from O'Malley's, had been just the tip of the iceberg. Since then, he'd been approached by a parade of nervous whistleblowers, each with their own piece of the puzzle. A city clerk who'd noticed discrepancies in building permits. A beat cop who'd been pressured to look the other way during drug busts. Even a low-level bookie who claimed Hawkins was skimming from the local gambling operations. Torres rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had enough to run the story, more than enough. But something held him back. The stakes were too high, the consequences too severe to rush into this half-cocked. His phone buzzed, startling him out of his reverie. An unknown number. Torres hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Torres." A female voice, tense with anxiety, came through the line. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a police officer with the Millbrook PD. We need to talk." Torres' pulse quickened. A cop reaching out directly. This was unprecedented. "Officer Chen," he replied cautiously, "what can I do for you?" "Not over the phone," Sarah insisted. "Can you meet me? It's about Hawkins. And it's big." They agreed on a meeting place, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. As Torres grabbed his coat and headed out, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would be a game-changer. Across town, in a dimly lit bar, Officer James Hawkins was holding court. The usual suspects were there: corrupt businessmen, crooked politicians, and the assorted bottom feeders that made up Millbrook's criminal underworld. "We've got a problem," Hawkins announced, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Someone's been talking, and I aim to find out who." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Hawkins let his gaze roam over the assembled faces, searching for signs of guilt or fear. "Now, I've been good to you all," he continued, his tone deceptively casual. "I've kept the heat off, greased the right palms, made sure everyone gets their fair share. But loyalty is a two-way street." He paused, taking a sip of his whiskey. "So here's how this is going to go. You're all going to put your ears to the ground. Find out who's been chirping to that reporter Torres, and when you do," his eyes hardened, "well, let's just say we'll make an example of them." As Hawkins laid out his plan, none of the assembled criminals noticed the small device hidden beneath one of the tables. A microphone, carefully placed, capturing every damning word. In a van parked a block away, FBI agent Marcus Daly listened intently, a grim smile on his face. "Got you, you son of a bitch," he muttered. The FBI had been building a case against Hawkins and his network for months, but they'd been struggling to get concrete evidence. This meeting, if it went as planned, could be the breakthrough they needed. Daly turned to his partner, Agent Samantha Reeves. "Call it in. We're going to need backup. Lots of it." As the wheels of justice began to turn, Sarah Chen sat nervously in a booth at the back of the deserted diner. She checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes. Where was Torres? Just as she was considering leaving, the bell above the door chimed. Michael Torres walked in, his eyes quickly scanning the room before settling on Sarah. He slid into the booth across from her. "Officer Chen," he said quietly, "I appreciate you reaching out, but I have to ask, why me? Why not go to Internal Affairs?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Internal Affairs. Half of them are in Hawkins' pocket. The other half are too scared to act. No, Mr. Torres, you're my last hope. The only one I can trust to get the truth out." Over the next hour, Sarah laid out everything she knew. Her own observations, her brother's testimony, the patterns she'd uncovered in the evidence room. Torres listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "This is incredible. Torres said when she finished. "But Officer Chen, you have to understand. Coming forward like this, you're putting yourself at enormous risk. Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah's eyes blazed with determination. "Mr. Torres, I became a cop to protect people, to serve justice. What Hawkins is doing, it's a perversion of everything that badge stands for. I can't stand by and let it continue, whatever the cost." Torres nodded solemnly. "All right, here's what we're going to do." As they formulated their plan, neither Sarah nor Torres noticed the figure watching them from a car across the street. Officer Randall Brooks, one of Hawkins' most trusted lieutenants, snapped a few photos with a long-range lens before starting his engine and driving off into the night. The next morning, the Millbrook Police Department was a hive of activity. Officers hurried back and forth, an undercurrent of tension running through the building. Sarah Chen walked in, her head held high, trying to project an air of normalcy despite the knot of fear in her stomach. As she reached her desk, a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. She turned to find herself face to face with Officer Hawkins. "Chen," he said, his voice friendly but his eyes cold. "The captain wants to see you. Now." Sarah's heart raced as she followed Hawkins to the captain's office. Inside, Captain Reginald Foster sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Officer Brooks stood in the corner, a smug smile on his face. "Officer Chen," the captain began, his voice grave. "Serious allegations have been brought to my attention. Allegations of misconduct, of betraying the trust of this department." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but the captain held up a hand to silence her. "We have evidence," he continued, nodding to Brooks, who produced a series of photographs. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized herself and Torres at the diner. Consulting with journalists, sharing confidential information, the captain shook his head. "I'm disappointed, Chen. I expected better from you." "Captain, I can explain," Sarah began, but Hawkins cut her off. "Save it, rookie," he snarled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "You're done. Turn in your badge and gun. You're suspended pending a full investigation." As Sarah stood there, shocked into silence, the captain sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Chen, but we can't have officers we can't trust. Clean out your desk and leave the premises immediately." In a daze, Sarah complied. As she packed up her meager belongings, she could feel the eyes of her fellow officers on her, some sympathetic, others accusatory, most simply confused. As she walked out of the station, her career seemingly in tatters, Sarah felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, but most of all, a grim determination. Hawkins and his cronies thought they'd won, but they'd silenced her. But they had no idea what was coming. Across town, Michael Torres was putting the finishing touches on his exposé. Sarah's information had been the final piece he needed. The article was comprehensive, damning, and backed up by a mountain of evidence. He took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the publish button. Just then, his phone rang. It was his editor, sounding panicked. "Torres, hold the story. We've just been slapped with a gag order. Some judge I've never heard of claims your article would compromise an ongoing federal investigation. We can't publish without opening ourselves up to serious legal repercussions." Torres felt the blood drain from his face. "What? That's impossible. This is clear intimidation, a violation of freedom of the press." I know, his editor said, sounding defeated. "But our lawyers say it's airtight. We have to comply, at least for now. I'm sorry, Michael. We'll fight this, but it's going to take time." As Torres hung up, he felt a mix of frustration and fear. Hawkins' reach was even greater than he'd imagined, but he wasn't about to give up. If he couldn't publish through official channels, he'd find another way. Meanwhile, in a secure FBI office, Agents Daly and Reeves were briefing their superiors on the latest developments. "We're close," Daly insisted, "closer than we've ever been. Hawkins is getting sloppy, making mistakes. If we can just keep the pressure on a little longer." Their supervisor, Assistant Director Carolyn Pierce, listened impassively. "And what about this reporter, Torres? And the rookie cop, Chen?" Reeves spoke up. "They're wild cards, ma'am. Not part of our original operation, but they've inadvertently helped us. The question is, what do we do about them?" Pierce considered for a moment. "For now, we watch and wait. If they can shake things up, draw Hawkins out, well, that might just work in our favor. But be ready to move at a moment's notice. I don't want civilians caught in the crossfire when this all goes down." As the various players in this unfolding drama made their moves and countermoves, the citizens of Millbrook went about their daily lives, blissfully unaware of the powder keg their town had become. But beneath the surface, tensions were building, secrets were bubbling up, and the stage was being set for a confrontation that would change everything. In a small apartment on the outskirts of town, Sarah Chen sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by notes, documents, and printouts. Her official investigation might have been shut down, but she wasn't about to give up. If the system wouldn't help her expose the truth, she'd find another way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Torres. "Story killed. Looking for alternatives. Don't give up." Sarah's jaw set with determination. She might have lost her badge, but she hadn't lost her resolve. One way or another, the truth would come out, and when it did, Hawkins and his entire corrupt empire would come crashing down. As night fell over Millbrook, the various players in this high-stakes game retreated to their corners, each planning their next move. The whistleblower had been temporarily silenced, but the echoes of their revelations continued to reverberate. The storm was gathering strength, and soon it would break over the town with a fury that would leave no one untouched. The truth was out there, fighting to be heard, and in the darkness, a spark of justice continued to burn, waiting for the right moment to ignite into a blaze that would consume the corruption that had long plagued Millbrook. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Internal affairs. The Millbrook Police Department was a powder keg, tension crackling through the air like static electricity. In the weeks since Officer Sarah Chen's suspension, rumors had run rampant. Some officers staunchly defended her integrity, while others branded her a traitor. But beneath it all ran an undercurrent of unease, a growing suspicion that something was deeply wrong within their ranks. Detective Lisa Hernandez of Internal Affairs sat at her desk, poring over Sarah Chen's personnel file for what felt like the 100th time. On paper, Chen was exemplary, top of her class at the academy, glowing recommendations, a record of community engagement that put most veteran officers to shame. Nothing about her history suggested she'd risk her career by leaking sensitive information to the press. Hernandez's instincts, honed by years on the force, told her there was more to this story. She'd been pushing for a full investigation into Chen's allegations, but had met resistance at every turn. Captain Foster had shut her down, citing the ongoing federal investigation. But Hernandez couldn't shake the feeling that the captain's reticence had more to do with self-preservation than procedure. A knock on her office door interrupted her musings. Officer Jake Martinez, a fresh-faced rookie who'd graduated from the academy with Chen, poked his head in. "Detective Hernandez, but a minute." Hernandez waved him in, noting the nervous energy radiating off the young officer. "What's on your mind, Martinez?" Jake closed the door behind him, his eyes darting around as if expecting to find hidden listeners. "It's about Sarah, Officer Chen. I don't think she did what they're saying she did, and I think I have proof." Hernandez leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Go on." Over the next half hour, Jake laid out a series of observations, odd conversations he'd overheard, discrepancies in patrol logs, a general pattern of behavior that pointed to something rotten at the heart of the department, and at the center of it all was Officer James Hawkins. "I know it sounds crazy," Jake finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hawkins is like a legend around here, but the more I look, the more I'm convinced he's dirty, and I think Sarah found out." Hernandez sat back, her mind racing. If even half of what Jake was saying was true, this went far beyond a simple case of a leaked story. This was systemic corruption on a scale she'd never encountered before. Martinez, she said carefully, what you're suggesting is extremely serious. Are you prepared to go on record with these allegations? Jake swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, ma'am. It's the right thing to do. As Jake left her office, Hernandez felt a mix of pride in the young officer's courage and fear for what lay ahead. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she'd hoped she'd never have to use. This is Detective Hernandez, she said when the line connected. I need to speak with Assistant Director Pierce of the FBI. It's urgent. Across town, in a nondescript motel room, Sarah Chen and Michael Torres were engaged in an intense strategy session. Maps of Millbrook covered one wall, covered in sticky notes and strings connecting various locations. A whiteboard stood in one corner, filled with names and connections, a crude organizational chart of Millbrook's criminal underworld. We need hard evidence, Sarah was saying, frustration evident in her voice. Testimony is good, but Hawkins has too many friends in high places. They'll discredit any witness we put forward. Torres nodded, absently chewing on the end of a pen. What about financial records? Follow the money, that's always been my motto. Sarah's eyes lit up. The construction company my brother works for, he mentioned discrepancies in their books. If we could get access to those records. It's risky, Torres cautioned. If we get caught accessing those files without authorization, we could be facing serious charges. I know, Sarah sighed. But what choice do we have? The official channels are closed to us. Sometimes to uphold the law, you have to work outside it. As they debated their next move, Nathan noticed the black SUV that had been parked across the street for the past hour, its tinted windows concealing the occupants within. Inside the SUV, Officer Randall Brooks lowered his binoculars, a smirk playing across his features. Got you, he muttered, reaching for his radio. Boss, it's Brooks. I've located Chen and the reporter. You were right. They're still digging. Hawkins' voice crackled through the speaker. Good work. Keep eyes on them. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. I'll handle this personally. As Brooks settled in for a long stakeout, Hawkins was across town, entering the opulent offices of Millbrook's most prominent real estate developer, Victor Kensington. The receptionist waved him through without a word. Hawkins was a frequent visitor. Kensington looked up as Hawkins entered, his expansive smile not quite reaching his eyes. James, always a pleasure. What can I do for Millbrook's finest today? Hawkins closed the door, his genial mask slipping away. Cut the crap, Vic. We've got a problem. That rookie cop and the reporter, they're not backing down. And now I'm hearing whispers that Internal Affairs is sniffing around. Kensington's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. I thought you said you'd handled it. I'm handling it, Hawkins snapped. But I need you to be prepared. If they start digging into your books. My books are clean, Kensington interrupted. You assured me of that. Hawkins leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. Your books are as clean as I say they are, Vic. Don't forget who's been keeping the regulators off your back all these years. Now, I need you to do something for me. As Hawkins laid out his plan, neither man noticed the small cleaning robot that had entered the room, its innocuous appearance concealing a highly sensitive microphone. In a van parked 2 blocks away, FBI agents Daly and Reeves exchanged triumphant looks as they listened to the damning conversation. This is it, Daly said, his voice tense with excitement. The smoking gun we've been waiting for. Call it in. We need to move now before they can cover their tracks. But as Reeves reached for her phone, a burst of static filled the van, followed by silence. The audio feed from the bug had gone dead. Damn it. Daly slammed his fist against the dashboard. They must have some kind of signal jammer. We were so close. Reeves put a calming hand on her partner's arm. We'll get them, Marcus. We've come too far to give up now. Back at the police station, Detective Hernandez was facing a crisis of her own. She'd just finished briefing Captain Foster on her findings, expecting support for a full internal investigation. Instead, she found herself on the receiving end of a blistering tirade. "You're out of line, Hernandez," Foster shouted, his face red with anger. Accusing a decorated officer like Hawkins based on the word of a disgraced rookie and some half-baked conspiracy theories. "I got to suspend you right alongside Chen." Hernandez stood her ground. "Sir, with all due respect, the evidence is compelling. We have a duty to investigate." "Your duty," Foster cut her off, "is to follow orders, and I'm ordering you to drop this. Now get out of my office before I do something we'll both regret." As Hernandez left, her mind reeling, she failed to notice Officer Brooks watching her from across the bullpen, a calculating look in his eyes. The sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the town. In their motel room hideout, Sarah and Torres were unaware of the forces converging around them. They had made a breakthrough. Daniel Chen had agreed to secretly copy financial records from his company's servers. It was a risky move, but it could provide the evidence they needed to blow the whole case wide open. "We'll need to move fast once we have those records," Torres was saying. "Publish everything before they can spin it or bury it." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "And we'll need to be ready for the backlash. Once this goes public, Hawkins and his cronies won't go down without a fight." As they continued planning, a soft knock at the door froze them both in place. Sarah reached for her gun, a personal weapon, not her service pistol, and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called out. "Sarah, it's Jake Martinez. I need to talk to you. It's important." Sarah exchanged a look with Torres before cautiously opening the door. Jake slipped inside, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "I just spoke with Detective Hernandez in Internal Affairs," he said in a rush. "She believes you, Sarah. She's trying to launch a full investigation, but she's hitting roadblocks. I think the corruption goes all the way to the top." As Jake filled them in on the latest developments, none of them noticed the small drone hovering outside the motel room window, its camera capturing everything. Blocks away, in a sleek, high-tech surveillance van, Officer Hawkins watched the live feed with growing anger. "So," he growled, "the rookie thinks she can take me down. Time to show her what happens to cops who don't know their place." He turned to Brooks, who sat at the van's control panel. "Initiate Operation Clean Sweep. I want Chen and that reporter taken care of tonight. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Brooks nodded, reaching for his phone to set the grim plan in motion. But as he dialed, a thought nagged at him. Was this really what he signed up for when he joined the force? Was he ready to cross this final, irrevocable line? As night fell over Millbrook, the various players in this drama found themselves at a crossroads. Sarah Chen and Michael Torres, armed with damning evidence but unaware of the immediate danger heading their way. Detective Hernandez, torn between her duty to the department and her commitment to justice. Jake Martinez, the young officer whose conscience had led him to take a stand. And James Hawkins, the corrupt cop whose empire of lies was teetering on the brink of collapse. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Millbrook to its core. As the clock ticked towards midnight, tensions rose, alliances shifted, and the thin blue line between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. The reckoning was coming, and when the dust settled, nothing in Millbrook would ever be the same again. In the darkness, sirens began to wail in the distance. The endgame had begun. The viral video. The night air crackled with tension as multiple forces converged on the seedy motel where Sarah Chen, Michael Torres, and Jake Martinez were holed up. Unbeknownst to them, their sanctuary was about to become a battleground. In the parking lot, Officer Brooks sat in an unmarked car, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. Hawkins' order to take care of Chen and the reporter echoed in his mind. He joined the force to protect and serve, not to become an assassin. As he watched Hawkins' hand-picked team of corrupt officers approach the motel, a war raged within him. Inside the motel room, Sarah's instincts suddenly flared. She held up a hand, silencing Torres mid-sentence. "Something's wrong," she whispered, reaching for her gun. Jake moved to the window, carefully peering out through a gap in the curtains. His face paled. "We've got company. Multiple officers approaching, and they don't look like they're here for a friendly chat." Torres scrambled to gather their evidence, laptops, files, and hard drives full of incriminating data. "We need to get out of here, now." But as Sarah reached for the door handle, a voice boomed from outside. "Sarah Chen, this is Officer Hawkins. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. This is your only warning." Sarah's mind raced. There was no way Hawkins was here on official business. This was a hit, plain and simple. She turned to Jake and Torres. "Back door, now." As they slipped out the rear exit, the front door of their room exploded inward, Hawkins and his team storming in with weapons drawn. In the parking lot, Brooks watched the scene unfold with growing horror. This wasn't a legitimate operation, it was an execution squad. His hand hovered over his radio, torn between loyalty and conscience. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. Chen and the others were making a break for it, darting between parked cars. In that moment, Brooks made his decision. He grabbed his phone and hit record, capturing footage of Hawkins' team pursuing the fleeing group with clearly malicious intent. Sarah, Torres, and Jake raced through the maze of parked cars, the sound of pursuing footsteps and angry shouts close behind. As they reached the edge of the lot, headlights suddenly blinded them. A car screeched to a halt inches from them. "Get in," a familiar voice shouted. Detective Hernandez was behind the wheel, her face a mask of determination. They piled in, bullets pinging off the car's frame as Hernandez floored it, tires squealing as they sped away into the night. "How did you know?" Sarah gasped, her heart pounding. Hernandez's eyes remained fixed on the road as she executed a sharp turn. "I've been monitoring chatter on the radio. When I heard Hawkins mobilizing without authorization, I knew something was up. Looks like I was right." As they sped through the darkened streets of Millbrook, none of them noticed the drone following silently overhead, its camera capturing every moment of the chase. Back at the motel, Hawkins was in a rage. "Find them," he roared at his team. "I don't care what it takes. This ends tonight." As his corrupt officers scrambled to comply, Hawkins failed to notice Officer Brooks slipping away, the incriminating video burning a hole in his pocket. Across town, in their high-tech surveillance van, FBI agents Daly and Rees were monitoring the situation with growing alarm. "This is spiraling out of control," Rees said, her voice tense. "We need to move in now." Daly shook his head, his eyes fixed on the monitors. "Not yet. We still don't have enough to take down the whole network. If we move too soon, the big fish will slip away. And if we wait too long, innocent people are going to die," Rees countered. Before Daly could respond, one of their screens lit up with an incoming transmission. Assistant Director Pierce's face appeared, her expression grave. "Agents, the situation has escalated beyond our control. You have new orders. Bring in Chen and her associates, protective custody, and take down Hawkins, by any means necessary. Authorization code Alpha Zulu 9. Daly and Rees exchanged a look. This was it, the endgame. As the FBI agents mobilized, the chase through Millbrook's streets continued. Hernandez wove through traffic with expert precision, but Hawkins' team was in close pursuit. "We need to get this evidence out," Torres said, clutching his laptop. "If they catch us, it's all over." Sarah's mind raced. The news station. If we can get there, broadcast everything live, they can't cover it up then. Hernandez nodded grimly. "Hold on tight. This is going to get rough." As she swerved onto a side street, a black SUV suddenly T-boned them, sending their car spinning. They came to a stop, airbags deployed, the sound of screeching tires and shattering glass filling the air. Dazed but alive, they scrambled out of the wrecked vehicle. Hawkins and his team were closing in, weapons drawn. "End of the line, Chen," Hawkins called out, a cruel smile on his face. time to face the consequences of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Sarah stood tall, placing herself between Hawkins and her friends. The only one facing consequences tonight is you, Hawkins. It's over. We have everything, the financial records, witness testimony, all of it. Hawkins laughed, a cold, harsh sound. And who's going to believe you? A disgraced cop, a muckraking reporter, and a couple of deluded do-gooders. Face it, Chen, you've lost. But as Hawkins raised his weapon, a new voice cut through the night. Freezy, FBI. Agents Daly and Rees emerged from the shadows, guns trained on Hawkins and his team. For a moment, everything was still, a tableau of tension frozen in the glow of streetlights. Then all hell broke loose. Hawkins, realizing he was cornered, opened fire. The street erupted into a war zone, bullets flying as FBI agents and corrupt cops exchanged fire. Sarah and her group dove for cover behind a dumpster, the clash of law enforcement versus lawlessness raging around them. In the chaos, Officer Brooks appeared, his phone held high. "I've got it all on video," he shouted over the gunfire. "Everything. Hawkins' orders, the chase, all of it." Sarah's eyes lit up. This was it, the smoking gun they needed. "We need to get that video out now." Torres was already on it, his journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. He grabbed Brooks' phone, quickly uploading the video to multiple social media platforms. Live in 3, 2, 1. As the firefight continued, the video began to spread across the internet like wildfire. Citizens of Millbrook, awakened by the commotion, started streaming from their homes, phones held high to capture the unfolding drama. Realizing he was now not only outgunned but exposed, Hawkins made a desperate break for it. He sprinted down an alley, Sarah hot on his heels. The chase led them to a construction site, scaffolding and half-finished buildings creating a treacherous maze. As they climbed higher, Hawkins growing more desperate with each passing moment, Sarah's voice rang out. "It's over, Hawkins. There's nowhere left to run." Cornered on a high platform, Hawkins turned, his face a mask of rage and fear. "You don't get it, do you, Chen? This is bigger than me, bigger than you. You think taking me down changes anything? There'll always be another me." Sarah approached cautiously, her gun trained on Hawkins. "Maybe, but for now you're done. Drop the weapon." For a moment, it seemed Hawkins might comply. Then, with a snarl of defiance, he raised his gun. A shot rang out. Hawkins stumbled, his eyes wide with shock, but it wasn't Sarah who had fired. Detective Hernandez stood behind him, her weapon still smoking. "That's for every good cop you've corrupted," Hernandez said, her voice cold. "For every citizen you've betrayed." As Hawkins collapsed, the sounds of sirens filled the air. The cavalry had arrived. Back on the street, the scene was one of controlled chaos. FBI agents were rounding up Hawkins' corrupt officers, while local news crews, alerted by the viral video, swarmed the area. Torres was in his element, giving an impromptu press conference that was being live-streamed across the country. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we stand here tonight witnesses to the fall of a corrupt empire, an empire built on lies, greed, and the betrayal of public trust. But we also stand as witnesses to the triumph of truth, to the courage of those who refuse to be silenced. As Torres continued, Sarah watched from the sidelines, a mix of emotions washing over her, relief, exhaustion, and a glimmer of hope for the future. Agent Daly approached her, a look of grudging respect on his face. "Officer Chen, looks like we owe you an apology, and a thank you." Sarah managed a tired smile. "Just doing my job, Agent. The job I swore an oath to do." As the night wore on and dawn began to break over Millbrook, the full scope of what had transpired began to sink in. The viral video had exploded across social media, picked up by national news networks. #Millbrook Exposed was trending worldwide. City Hall was in chaos, as implicated officials either resigned in disgrace or frantically tried to distance themselves from Hawkins' web of corruption. The FBI had expanded its operation, raiding offices and homes across town. The house of cards was collapsing, and in its wake, a shocked community was left to pick up the pieces. Sarah, Torres, Jake, and Hernandez found themselves hailed as heroes, their faces plastered across screens nationwide. But for Sarah, the victory felt bittersweet. The department she had loved, the badge she had honored, had been tarnished. Trust between the police and the community they served had been shattered. As she stood watching the sunrise, Sarah made a silent vow. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to restore faith in the system, to create the kind of police force that truly protected and served. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but as she looked at the determined faces of her allies, Torres with his unwavering commitment to the truth, Jake with his youthful idealism, Hernandez with her steadfast integrity, Sarah felt a surge of hope. Millbrook had been shaken to its core, but from the ashes of corruption, a new day was dawning. A day of accountability, transparency, and justice. And Sarah Chen would be at the forefront, badge or no badge, fighting for the ideals she had always believed in. As the first rays of sunlight bathed the town in a golden glow, Sarah took a deep breath. The storm had passed, but the real work was just beginning. Millbrook would heal, would learn, would grow. And she would be there every step of the way, ensuring that the thin blue line stood for honor once again. The night of reckoning was over. The dawn of justice had begun. Aftermath and accountability. The weeks following the explosive night that brought down Officer James Hawkins and his corrupt network were a whirlwind of activity in Millbrook. The small town found itself thrust into the national spotlight, its name becoming synonymous with both police corruption and the power of grassroots justice. Sarah Chen sat in a crowded town hall meeting, watching as citizens passionately debated the future of their police department. The revelations had shaken the community to its core, leaving a rift between those who had lost all faith in law enforcement and those who believed reform was possible. Mayor Eleanor Fitzgerald, her face etched with lines of stress, stood at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know these past weeks have been difficult for all of us. The betrayal we've experienced cuts deep. But tonight, we're here to talk about moving forward, about rebuilding trust, and ensuring that what happened under James Hawkins, what never happens again." As the mayor outlined a series of proposed reforms, from increased oversight to community policing initiatives, Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Michael Torres, notepad in hand, a wry smile on his face. "Quite a different atmosphere from our clandestine meetings, eh?" he whispered. Sarah nodded, a mix of emotions washing over her. "It's surreal. A month ago, we were hiding in motels, fearing for our lives. Now you're a national hero," Torres finished. "How does it feel?" Sarah's response was interrupted by a voice from the crowd. "Why should we trust any cops after what happened? The whole system is rotten." The room erupted into heated debate. Sarah stood, moved by an impulse she couldn't quite name. "May I speak?" she called out. All eyes turned to her as she made her way to the front of the room. Standing before her community, Sarah took a deep breath. "I understand your anger," she began, "your fear, your mistrust. I felt it too. It's why I risked everything to expose the corruption that had infected our department. But I'm standing here today to tell you that not all cops are like Hawkins. There are good officers out there, men and women who truly believe in protecting and serving their community." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, all attentive. What happened in Millbrook is a tragedy, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild our police force from the ground up, to create a department that is transparent, accountable, and truly serves the people. It won't be easy. It will require effort from both the police and the community. But I believe it's possible, because I've seen the best of what law enforcement can be, and I refuse to let the worst define us. As Sarah stepped back, a moment of silence fell over the room. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It wasn't universal. There were still plenty of skeptical faces in the crowd, but it was a start. Mayor Fitzgerald approached Sarah, an appreciative look in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. Your words remind us all of the complexities we face." She turned back to the audience. "Which brings me to an announcement. In light of recent events, and as part of our commitment to reform, we're establishing a civilian oversight committee, and I'd like to ask Sarah Chen to lead it." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this. As the crowd's reaction swelled, a mix of cheers and skeptical murmurs, she found herself nodding. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice firm with resolve. As the town hall meeting continued, across town in the Millbrook Police Department, Interim Chief of Police, Captain Lisa Hernandez, was facing challenges of her own. The department was in disarray, morale at an all-time low, and the task of separating the corrupt officers from the honest ones was proving to be a Herculean task. Hernandez sat at her desk, poring over personnel files, when a knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called. Officer Jake Martinez entered, his young face a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Chief, but a minute." Hernandez gestured to the chair across from her. "What's on your mind, Martinez?" Jake sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been thinking about what happened, about Hawkins and everything that went down. And I want to know how I can help make things right, how we can rebuild trust with the community." Hernandez leaned back, studying the young officer. In him she saw a glimmer of hope for the future of the department. "It's not going to be easy, Jake. We're facing an uphill battle. But if we have officers like you, willing to step up and be part of the solution, we've got a fighting chance." She stood, walking to a whiteboard covered in notes and diagrams. "I'm putting together a community outreach task force. Officers who'll be on the front lines of rebuilding relationships with the public. I'd like you to be part of it." Jake's eyes lit up. "Really? I mean, yes, absolutely. I won't let you down, Chief." As Jake left her office, Hernandez allowed herself a small smile. It was officers like him that gave her hope for the future of the Millbrook PD. Meanwhile, in a federal courthouse in the state capital, the legal proceedings against Hawkins and his co-conspirators were in full swing. FBI agent Marcus Daly sat in the gallery, watching as Hawkins, looking much smaller without his uniform and bravado, was led into the courtroom. The judge, a stern-faced woman with steely grey hair, looked down at Hawkins. "James Hawkins, you stand accused of multiple counts of corruption, extortion, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. How do you plead?" Hawkins, his face a mask of defiance, spat out his response. "Not guilty, Your Honor." As the legal proceedings began in earnest, Daly felt a presence beside him. He turned to find his partner, Agent Samantha Reeves, sliding into the seat next to him. "Thought I'd find you here," she said softly. "How's it looking?" Daly's expression was grim but satisfied. "The evidence is overwhelming. Between Chen's documentation, Torres' expose, and that viral video, Hawkins doesn't stand a chance, and he's singing like a canary, implicating everyone he can in a desperate bid for leniency." Reeves nodded, her eyes on Hawkins. It's hard to believe one man could cause so much damage. It wasn't just one man, Daly reminded her. It was a systemic failure. That's what makes this case so important. It's not just about punishing Hawkins. It's about exposing the cracks in the system that allowed him to flourish. As they watched the trial unfold, both agents knew that the ripple effects of the Millbrook case would be felt in police departments across the country. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the eternal vigilance required to keep power in check. Back in Millbrook, Sarah Chen was embarking on her new role as head of the Civilian Oversight Committee. She stood before a diverse group of citizens, community leaders, activists, business owners, and concerned residents, all united in their desire to see real change in their police department. "Thank you all for being here," Sarah began. Our task is not an easy one. We're here to bridge the gap between the police and the community, to ensure transparency and accountability, and to help shape the future of law enforcement in Millbrook." As she outlined their responsibilities and the challenges they faced, Sarah felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since her early days on the force. This was why she had become a cop in the first place, to make a real difference in her community. "We have a unique opportunity here," she continued, "to create a model for other cities to follow, to show that positive change is possible, even in the wake of betrayal and corruption. But it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen." The meeting stretched late into the night, filled with passionate debate, innovative ideas, and a shared commitment to justice. As Sarah left the community center, she found Michael Torres waiting for her, leaning against his car. "Long night?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee. Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Long, but productive. We're making progress, slowly but surely." Torres nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been offered a book deal," he said after a moment, "to write about everything that happened here in Millbrook. The corruption, the investigation, the fallout." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to take it?" "I'm considering it," Torres replied, "but I wanted to talk to you first. Your story is a big part of this, Sarah. I won't do it without your blessing." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "Write it," she said finally. "The world needs to know what happened here, not just the corruption, but how it was exposed and what we're doing to fix it. It might help other communities facing similar issues." Torres smiled, relief evident on his face. "Thank you. I promise to do the story justice." As they stood there in the quiet night, Sarah felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over her. The past months had been a whirlwind of danger, betrayal, and upheaval. But out of that chaos, something positive was emerging. A chance for real change, for justice, for a better future. In the days and weeks that followed, Millbrook began the long process of healing and reform. The trial of James Hawkins and his co-conspirators concluded with multiple convictions, sending a strong message about the consequences of corruption. The police department, under Hernandez's leadership, and with input from the Civilian Oversight Committee, implemented sweeping changes, from enhanced training programs to stringent accountability measures. Sarah Chen, though no longer wearing a badge, found herself more involved in law enforcement than ever. Her work with the Oversight Committee was challenging but rewarding, allowing her to bridge the gap between the police and the community she loved. One sunny afternoon, almost a year after the night that had changed everything, Sarah stood outside the newly renovated Millbrook Police Department. A crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new motto, etched in stone above the entrance: integrity, accountability, community. As Mayor Fitzgerald delivered a speech about the town's journey and the lessons learned, Sarah's gaze swept over the assembled crowd. She saw Jake Martinez, now a respected community liaison officer, chatting with a group of teenagers. Lisa Hernandez stood tall and proud, the weight of her responsibility as chief evident in her bearing, but tempered by a newfound hope. Michael Torres was there too, his pen flying across his notepad as he documented this latest chapter in Millbrook's story. And scattered throughout the crowd were faces both familiar and new, citizens who had come together to demand change and work towards a better future. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find an elderly woman smiling up at her. "Miss Chen," the woman said, her eyes bright with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done for our town. My grandson wants to be a police officer, and for the first time in a long while, I'm proud to encourage him." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." As the woman walked away, Sarah took a deep breath, looking up at the new motto gleaming in the sunlight. The road ahead was still long, the work far from over. But for the first time in a long while, the future looked bright. Millbrook had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. The scars of corruption would take time to fade, but in their place, a new foundation of trust and accountability was being built. And Sarah Chen, once a lone voice crying out against injustice, now stood at the heart of a community committed to real, lasting change. As she walked down the steps of the police department, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The thin blue line had been redrawn, not as a barrier between police and community, but as a bridge connecting them. And she would continue to walk that line, day by day, working to create the kind of justice system she had always believed in. The sun was setting on Millbrook, casting a warm glow over the town. But for Sarah Chen and the community she served, a new day was just beginning.